We're at the Herald Sun offices on the banks of the Yarra River. We've got the day off today because Aaron Patterson's trial is not sitting. But we've assembled the entire team for a special bonus episode. I'm Brooke Grebert-Craig.
I'm Laura Placella.
And I'm Anthony Dowsley.
And this is The Mushroom Cook. Welcome, guys.
Thanks. We're here back at the Herald and Weekly Times building.
In the city.
It's almost strange to be recording this episode from the actual podcast studio in our office and not where we've been doing it out in Morwell.
And the fact that I'm sitting down with both of you guys, I'm sure our listeners will really enjoy what's to come.
Let's get underway.
Bring the heat.
So let's talk about why is there a day off in court today?
I'll tackle this one. Late last week, the judge told the jury that they wouldn't actually be required to come in on Monday and listen to any evidence. He explained to them that there were some things happening in the background and the lawyers were going to take the day off to get up to speed. A few hours after he told them that, the jury actually came back with a note for the judge and they had a few questions. One of them was, are we going to have every Monday off? They wanted to know if moving forward they would never need to come to court on Monday. But the judge did have to burst their bubble and explain to them that this was a one-off and moving forward the trial would be sitting on Mondays. For people that don't know, jurors get paid for jury service. So every day that they come in, they get given an amount. And they also wanted to ask the judge, are we going to get paid if we don't come in on Monday? And he said he'd have to get back to them on that one.
So that's essentially why we're at our office in the city today, because the jury has a day off.
Are we getting paid today?
That's a good question.
I feel sorry for the people at the coffee shop because they've been doing a roaring trade down in Morwell in the main street. It's called the Daily Cafe,
yes,
isn't it?
We should give them a shout out. It's the Daily.
And on the first day of the trial, I remember walking in there and it's because it's a country town, you had all of the defence lawyers sitting at one big table.
Near the PowerPoint because they needed to charge their laptops.
Everyone's charging up. You had the police sitting at a central table in the middle of the place. And then you had all the journos sort of milling around, wondering, well, can we talk to these people or we just watch or what are we going to do? No one approached anyone at the end of the day. Everyone stayed at their tables. And all that went through my mind is I didn't know where the prosecutors were. So I think they went around to a place called JD's around the corner. So I think that's been their little cubbyhole since. So it's an interesting kind of field because everyone's sort of in court all day and you're hearing all this evidence. And then you're sort of at lunch and, you know, you're seeing all these familiar faces but just nod and say hello, but that's about it.
And does this happen at trials in Melbourne, Laura?
Well, because trials in Melbourne are held at the Supreme Court in the middle of the CBD, there are so many places for people to go grab a bite. And some of the lawyers also go back to their chambers or their offices to spend the lunch break. So everyone's very dispersed, where, like Dow said, in Morwell, everyone's kind of flocking to the same venue. But early on in the trial, the jurors were actually told if they are out at lunch and they see anyone involved in the trial, whether it's a lawyer or a journalist or just someone they recognise from the courtroom, they shouldn't interact. And if that person doesn't interact with them, they really shouldn't be offended. Everyone's just making sure they're doing their job.
And would you say that the media pack has thinned out now that we're going into week 3?
Well, I've returned to Melbourne and we can watch it from down here on the video screens at the Supreme Court. So I've done that. And there were other journos there that were in Morwell like I was for the first week. The first week is always jam-packed because you've got openings and you've got witnesses that you've been waiting to hear from. And then, you know, as it goes on, the newspapers and the TVs tend to not go with it at the start of their bulletin or at the front page every single day. And we all sort of come back towards the end of the trial in most cases.
And how many journalists have been sitting at the Supreme Court in Melbourne?
While I've been there was, 4, 5, 6 of us at least. And you can hear everything and see everything, but you can't look around the court. So there's a similar overflow room. We call them overflow rooms. So you're not in the court, which has got a ballot. There's 6 of us allowed officially in, but there's more that do go in. So we're all sort of in the overflow rooms watching video screens. And it leaves us a bit more free to talk to each other, or if we don't understand a piece of evidence, we can turn to a colleague and say, did you hear that? What did you write down? Or something like that.
So the overflow room in Morwell has about 15 journalists, I say, sometimes a bit less. It really depends on the day. But it's very similar to the room in Melbourne, right?
Yeah, it's a big room in Melbourne, and it's just a big screen at one end and seats. I mean, there's 30, 40 seats in there. There's not that many journos watching it from the Supreme Court in Melbourne. But, we've got someone sort of chaperoning us. There's a court staff that's there, and we just watch and we write our notes, just as we would when we're in Morwell.
And Laura, you've been sitting in the actual courtroom most days. How's that been?
There's been a few days where I've had one of those official seats in the courtroom. They're marked with a white piece of paper that says reserved for the media. But like we were saying, over the course of the second week, there were less journalists and also less interest from the public. So in the first week, most seats in that courtroom were taken. But as the evidence starts to continue and the interest maybe wanes, more seats become available. So it's been quite easy to walk in and grab your seat to watch the proceedings.
And have many members of the public been sitting in court?
Yes, there's definitely been a few. Some will just come for one day. You got to wonder if it's maybe just a day off for them and they've thought to themselves, oh, I'll just mosey on down to the Latrobe Valley Law Courts and check out the trial. But for others, you're seeing the same sorts of faces, whether they're people from Erin's life or people who knew the guests.
So now Ian Wilkinson has been sitting in court most days. This is after he gave his evidence last week. Can you talk to us more about the dynamics between him and his family?
Yeah, and I'll just flag that as soon as a witness is done giving evidence in a trial, they're welcome to stay in the courtroom and watch the proceedings. But until they've given evidence, they're actually not allowed to watch any of the trial because the court doesn't want their evidence to be tainted by what they've heard from previous witnesses. As you mentioned, Ian has been sitting in court observing the proceedings, and after giving evidence, he's sat down in the courtroom and he's had relatives surrounding him.
And there's a point because we've been talking about rubbing shoulders with people down at the coffee shop. Well, in court, because there's media, there's family members and there's members of the public, I was sitting next to someone who I don't even know, but I'm positive that they were a family member. And you almost feel a sense of guilt that you are typing away someone's evidence as they give it. And as you're tapping on your keys, I could feel the woman next to me begin to weep, and I could see that. And you just feel like sort of maybe going and getting another seat, but you don't want to interrupt the court, so you just tap away as quietly as you can. And
there might not be another seat either.
Yeah, that's the other thing as well. So you do feel yourself, you know that you're in the middle of something that is real and that is extremely sad, because we are obviously talking about the deaths of 3 people and another person who almost died who gave evidence. And, it's not just something that you're only reporting on. You are becoming involved in something more important than anything going on in your own life.
Yes, and I think it's that timely reminder that at the end of the day, 3 people have died and relatives are really still grieving their deaths.
And part of this trial is dealing with a family that, as you've just mentioned, Brooke, we are dealing with a family that's grieving, a family where members of that family have to give evidence. We've heard evidence from Simon Patterson, Erin's husband. We've heard evidence from Ian Wilkinson, Simon's uncle. We've heard evidence from the children, Simon and Erin's children. So we are dealing with family ties, and we are getting a picture, in some ways, of their relationship.
As Brooke and I explored on one of the last podcast episodes, when Erin's children were giving evidence, and this was pre-recorded evidence from a month after the lunch. So she's seeing younger versions of her children on the screen. And it was clear that from the doc she was becoming quite emotional. She reached for a tissue at one stage, and the mood in the courtroom definitely shifted, especially in the case of the evidence of her daughter. She was 9 at the time. And you see this small little girl sitting on a blue armchair on the screen, and she's being asked questions about essentially the circumstances surrounding the death of her grandparents. And she has to explain to the interviewer that she doesn't know too much about the lunch because she wasn't there, but he still has to ask her questions about what she remembers from before and what she remembers afterwards to help flesh out the case.
So there is a theme of family ties running through this trial, and the family ties also extended to her son giving evidence. Being older, he's given a more considered answers in some ways as to relationship between his parents. And this is also, we've heard evidence about the slow breakup of their parents. We've heard about money and money issues. We've also heard about the family ties with other members of the family, the brothers, the sisters, the uncle, the auntie. So we are in the middle of, in many ways, a family kind of trial where they're all giving evidence, or those that are called, there are people giving evidence about other family members. That's got to be hard.
And while we don't know yet who will be giving evidence tomorrow, it's very clear, though, that the trial is about to shift into the more expert witnesses. At the start of the trial, the prosecution in their openings flagged that there would be evidence led from experts that specialise in phones, in mushrooms, in data, and we're starting to head towards that part of the trial.
And in many ways, this is what you could almost call the dog days of a trial, where it becomes, you're dealing with scientific evidence, you're dealing with expert evidence about how things work. And that's when you get into really technical stuff. It's hard to listen to sometimes because, you know, you're dealing with scientific or other expert evidence. So even from a storytelling point of view, it gets a bit harder as well.
And we will try our hardest, though, to explain it all on our future episodes, but you might have to bear with us a little bit.
Thanks so much, guys, for joining me at the Herald Sun's office in the city.
See you back in Morwell.
As a rose between two thorns? No, actually the thorn between two roses is the thorn between two roses. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Dowz. So to stay up to date with all our latest coverage, go to themushroomcook.com.au.